One of the greatest flaws we have as people is thinking we can size up another person quickly, analyze their personality, their mindset, their objectives, and their needs in a matter of seconds, if not minutes. Let's have ourselves a pocket sized pep talk because, in fact, nothing is further from the truth. We're going to be talking about building real trust. When it comes to working with others, is there a more important task or topic?
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jollis.
Today's guest, Larry Jacobson, EDD, is a practice transition specialist and attorney who has represented professionals and professional service firms for over 40 years. He's developed his proprietary Wheels of Insta-Trust and personality archetype analysis and working with his clients. His new book is Insta-Trust, the proven trust-building process to create instant rapport and long-term relationships. It hit the shelves in February, and he's here with us now. Welcome to the show, Larry. Great to have you.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation this afternoon.
Well, let's do it. Let's dive right in. And the part I want to start with you, because I've had my ups and downs with this, is kind of talking me through why the standard quicker assessment models, and I'm talking about DISC and Myers Briggs and all the other 4-part models, don't seem to be models that you particularly like or endorse. So talk to me about that.
Wow, that's a fabulous opening question. And I am familiar with DISC as part of my master's studies at the University of Pennsylvania. And Myers Briggs, of course, is used frequently in terms of personality assessments and even recruiting assessments and all. Putting aside that you have to have people who are willing to take a DISC or a Myers Briggs test. And of course, many people, probably even more and more people, are declining to do so for fear that they're going to be letting out information, so to speak, to people that they don't particularly want to disclose. The challenge is, and I've seen this over 40 years, it's really hard to determine somebody's credibility in an instant. You know, they can be very, very polished liars or con artists, so to speak. And so in order to have trust, and trust is more than just integrity, trust is credibility. Trust is the ability to deliver what you say you can deliver. So if I'm going to a doctor, frankly, what I'm looking for is, let's say I'm going to a surgeon, what I'm trying to assess is whether or not I think he or she can deliver the goods in terms of the types of surgery that I might need.
Right.
If I'm going to a lawyer and I've got, let's say, a criminal case, I want to go to a lawyer that really demonstrates that they know what in the hell they're doing when it comes to defending somebody in an important criminal matter. If I'm going to an accountant, I want to make sure that they can handle my tax matter or some other financial matter that I might have. And so as a result, if you're one of those types of professionals, you have to have the ability to build trust quickly with a potential new client or patient. And you don't do it by saying, trust me, because that's the absolute worst thing in the world you can do. Because
you mean, to be honest with you, Larry, isn't a phrase that you particularly like?
No, it's a phrase that I particularly hate. Because it puts you, it makes you look defensive.
Yeah.
If I say, trust me, then the other person is saying, well, why in the world is he saying that? Is he hiding something? Or is he not able to really, does he care about me? Can he deliver what he's promising or what have you? Yeah. And so, yes, in the book, I make that quite clear, but it's more than just the book. People who default mechanism is trust me frequently are either incompetent or have some other personality fault where you should trust them.
Yeah. All right. So let me wrestle you back a little bit because I'm going to be all over trust with you. One of the reasons why I wanted you on this show is because I work with a lot of salespeople, and I was a Xerox employee for many years and worked on a couple of their sales training models. And the toughest part we had, Larry, wasn't objection handling or opening tactics or even creating urgency. It was trust. So we're going to be there in a second. I'm pulling you back a little bit to the personality piece because I think we're on the same page. Let me see if I've got it from my angle. I always wrestled with DISC and Myers Briggs and Schmeyers Briggs and all the imitators because I can't hand my client an assessment, say, fill that out. We're going to have an appointment tomorrow. And I want to get inside and know what kind of personality you have. I have to read it right there on the fly. I got to look at what's on the wall. I got to look at how you're signing that email. I'm looking for clues, but I don't have time for an assessment. So, I wish I did. And quite frankly, of course, most people know Myers Briggs and DISC because we have been assessed. And so my feeling was, gee, as long as I sell me for the rest of my life, I'm gold. But I don't know this guy, Larry. And all I've got is a couple beams over his head right now. So
Right.
that's what I was wrestling with. Are we on the same page there?
We are 100% on the same page. And what you and I are doing right now, the mating dance that we're doing very early on in this podcast episode, is finding out, indirect signs for each other as to what our personality type is. Like, for instance, the first personality type I discuss in the book is close to the vest. Well, you're not close to the vest. And as you can tell, I'm not close to the vest. Close to the vest means somebody that's reticent in terms of giving out information, and somebody who's, really, somebody who is challenging in terms of drawing out things for them, and somebody you would normally then have to ask a lot of open-ended questions. But the point is that early on in your interaction, you've got to try to determine their personality type, and act accordingly in terms of how you build trust. Because one of the things that I've learned a long time ago is I can't change their personality. Their personality is what it is. If they're let's say close to the vest, I can't change them into somebody who's a schmoozer or somebody who's more gregarious. I have to work with what I have to work with. And so hopefully in the beginning of a first interaction, and this is true in sales as well, I'm trying to figure out what type of person they are, so then I can adapt accordingly. If they're like a know-it-all, if they think they know everything about what we're going to talk about, but they obviously don't, then I'm going to have to adjust my pitch accordingly, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. I found it actually, since we came through this pandemic and we all went to this virtual existence, I actually find it, for me at least, a little bit easier because I get into people's offices when I'm on a Zoom call or on a, Teams or whichever program I'm using, where a lot of times I don't have that ability. I might meet them somewhere, but I learn a lot from from office setups, just looking at what's behind people. But that's me. This is your material. So I've got entrepreneurs listening. I've got, a lot of business owners listening. Tell me, now that we can't give people assessments beforehand, tell me how we're going to read those personalities. And I'm assuming we got to go pretty fast to adjust. Give us some tips on that.
Sure. The whole key to all of this is very early on giving the other person the impression that you're paying attention. Mm-hmm. All too often in a business interaction, and this is true in a sales call, in professionals being retained, for entrepreneurs pitching venture capital, or private equity, and I've all been part of all of those as an attorney in the past. There just tends to be this approach where I'm just going to go in, I have a pitch, and I'm going to do it. And really, what I would say is you need to spend the first few minutes of any interaction trying to make them feel, the other side feel comfortable that you understand why they're there and you're paying attention to them, and the meeting is about them. It is not about you. Now, the reality is, of course, at the end of the day, the meeting is as much about you, me, as it is them. But the notion, what you have to do is you just have to ask a whole bunch of open-ended questions that at the end of the day really involves a really simple concept. Is this somebody that is willing to go to war with me or to be in the trenches with me? Is this somebody that I am willing to engage in something that's really important to me? And you do that in terms of trying to find out about their personality by asking questions. And then you have to be an active listener. You have to determine relatively quickly what type of person are they? Are they an egomaniac? Are they somebody who's, close to the vest? Are they nervous? Are they somebody who takes their time in making decisions? I mean, I'll give you an example. I'm working with a client in Colorado, and we're trying to sell their practice, and he's not acting in a completely rational, logical manner. He's being emotional as well as logical and all. So when I have to have conversations with him and with the potential buyer, it's very, very clear that we have to take into account his personality, that it's not just money and it's not just employment, but it's how he quote unquote feels about the deal and with the potential buyer of his practice. And as a result, by doing that, by asking questions and listening and pivoting, so to speak, we come up with tools that really build his trust. I mean, he sent me a text at the end of last night's call saying he really appreciates what I'm doing on behalf of him. Well, that alone tells me, most finance people don't send texts like that. But that tells me, that gives me an insight as to him, that I have to continue to work on the emotional aspects of the matter not just the financial aspects. So you have to read clues, subtle clues, really, really fast.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, you had me about 4 minutes ago, the moment you started talking about open probes. And you know something, Larry, they're in a person right now, sitting in their car, walking their dog, listening to this show, who hasn't heard we got to ask questions and probably want to keep them open early. And yet I'm a guy who goes around the country and spent 40 years too. And I actually just record people. I go, okay, go have a conversation. I'll just run a recorder. And I'm going to count those. I don't tell them, but I'm counting those number of questions. And it's one of those things, it's instinct versus logic. Everything you just said is completely logical. What we need to impress upon people, you and me right now, is that it may be logical what you're hearing. Don't think for an instant that your instincts are serving you well on this one, because I can't even get people to ask questions, let alone open questions. So when they're asking questions, it's more of an interrogation. They're closing them down. They're short. They're leading. And they feel aggressive, particularly when we talk about things that might be a challenge to a customer. And quite frankly, that's why consultants and business people are frequently visiting. Because if everything's perfect, why am I at the dentist? Okay. So I love the fact you did. I'll just throw one real quick thing at you. For years, I was using tape recorders. I'd tape record them and just count the number of questions. But I found, particularly for those who couldn't grasp the open-ended end of it, that wasn't really telling, because they might have a decent ratio. Something for you. I actually used to bring out chess clocks. Now I just use a chess clock app. And I actually use 2 clocks and will run the time of how much that other person's talking versus how much you're talking. Because you asked me a great probe. One of my favorites is, everybody has a story, Larry. I'd love to hear yours. That could take you 5 minutes. Now, I'm only getting credited with one question, but Larry's talking for 5 minutes. We're both winning. But I think we're on the same page of we want to create trust. One of the first things we have to do is stop talking.
Well, there are two things. First of all, you have to stop talking. But the questions that you ask have to be pertinent. They have to be, as much as you can determine, personal to the person you're speaking with. But above all else, you can't come off as a rote computer. Right. So many people, whether it's in sales or whether it's a pitch, let's just assume you want to make a pitch to raise money. And you're told that, by other people, this is what you have to do when you go see venture capitalists. You have to do A, B, C, D, and what have you. The bottom line is, if you come off rote doing A, B, C, and D, and you have no personality, and you have no creativity, and you have no sense of the room. In other words, you're doing this and all, I guarantee you the likelihood is you're going to have a bunch of people that are sitting there that are going, or if they're not actually doing it, they're thinking it, or what have you. And it's the same if you're a doctor. The tendency is overwhelming. You have a checklist and you ask you ask question A and then B and C and D, and depending upon what the answers are, or whatever, but you do it in a very rote, mechanical way. Well, hell, that really doesn't do a darn thing in terms of building trust. All it means is that, you're coming off as being a human computer, and I'm irrelevant. I'm basically just, somebody that, all you're trying to do is trying to solve perhaps my medical issue, but you're not doing it holistically based upon who I am, recognizing that perhaps my view of the world is different than yours in terms of how we figure out things. And that's where professionals and salespeople and finance people get into a lot of trouble, because they basically have one thing in their toolkit, and it has nothing to do with the person that's sitting in front of them. They're just viewing themselves as a technical specialist, and they're there to solve a technical problem. But frankly, you're not going to solve their technical problem unless you can to basically interact with them on a human level. Yeah. You just can't.
Yeah. You're my kind of lawyer, I have to tell you. I'm used to really arguing with a lot of lawyers about, and I've trained a bunch of lawyers on the sales side, but they are so, and maybe it's insecurity for some people, and we all have this level of insecurity, but there's such an attempt to show me how smart they are. And it's so, I hate to tell them, but my feeling is always that I'm not telling you knowledge isn't important. I'm telling you it's a bit overrated, because quite frankly, we always get to the knowledge part, but I walked in assuming that. How about the trust parts? Let's you and me, we made that promise in the beginning. Let's really hone in on trust right now. And if I've got it right out of the gate, we're talking, one of your moves is, we better know what an open probe is. We better be able to ask not just questions like, how's your day? But I'm with you. As Covey would say, let's begin with the end in mind. Let's really think out some great open-ended questions that relate to what we're doing. Okay. But let's swap a couple, because I'm curious. You give me another one. I'll give you one. All right. So give me something else from your book that is a process behavior, a process move that would be measurable, because I think it's tough that somebody could be sitting there and say, got it, to gain trust.
Okay. This is a story from the book. Mm-hmm. And this gets back to when I was the chair of a private day school board. And we had a first-year head of school, and she had decided towards the end of her first year that she wanted to terminate the head of her middle school. And I won't get into the gory details of the book as to how the decision was made, because part of it had to do with me being in the emergency room for a bout of diverticulitis and all. Mm. But the bottom line is, we knew that the person being terminated was a highly volatile person. And we knew that that person actually had a longer relationship with me than the head of school, who was new. And so when the head of school informed her that she was going to be terminated at the end of the school year, it was basically turned over to me to basically negotiate with this person. And so what we did in the first meeting is I basically said, I'm not going to use her name because of confidentiality, but, Miss X, I know this came as a surprise to you. I know that you're hurt and disappointed. Just let it all out. I said, I'm not going to sit here and make believe that you're not hurt, but let it all out. And I let her. She went on for like 30 or 45 minutes. And I think I might have said 10 words during that period of time. And those 10 words all had to do, well, what did you feel about that or the other thing? I didn't say a frickin' word during that period. And I said at the end of that meeting, I said, let's sit down. Let's find a time to talk again in another 2 or 3 days. And we did. And by letting her vent, and I mean, she trusted me to a certain extent anyhow, because she knew me by virtue of my position over the previous few years, just letting her vent build trust. Okay, so then we go to step 2. And step 2 is, now granted, I had authority to do pretty much whatever I wanted in terms of negotiating settlement. So I said in the second meeting, I heard what you had to say. If I understand what your goals and objectives are, your goals and objectives are to improve your academic background so the next job you can get, you have better academic credentials. So I said, why don't we do this? We'll offer you a really nice severance package. You're probably going to expect money and continued benefits, and we'll do that. But beyond that, and this is unorthodox, but I think based upon you, what you would like, or not what you would like, but what you probably need, is if we would agree to pay for a master's program for you in educational administration. And she was floored. She wasn't expecting that. But because I listened and I built trust with her, she saw that what I was trying to do was to tailor a situation that was based upon her needs, not based upon, what the standard textbook would say, we'll give you 6 months or a year's worth of pay or what have you, but we're trying to solve your issue. And she started crying because, my goodness gracious, I listened to her. I came up with a solution that was tailored to her. That's what building Insta-Trust is about. You try to tailor situations that, after you've had enough of an opportunity to really listen to the other person as to what they need. And sometimes what they need is not necessarily what they think they need. That's a whole different story, a whole different discussion. But once you find out what they need, then you can start tailoring solutions to what they need, and not to come off yourself as the brightest person in the room or the smartest bulb in the universe and what have you.
Yeah, I love that. It's when I was at Xerox, I would put on 2-week classes. Classes lasted for 2 weeks, 6 students, 1 instructor. They're on videotape every day. And, in training, we have this rule of thumb. If you emphasize everything, you emphasize nothing. So to build on what you just said, Larry, I put 2 words in front of the salesperson's vision. Just 2 words on the wall and a camera above those 2 words. And the words that I chose were, "You said." And I chose those words because if we do what you're talking about, Larry, then we can use things like as you presented that. I'm recommending that master's program because you had mentioned earlier, you said to us, and which is letting somebody know I heard you. It also makes sure we use their words and not ours. Right. But that's how important I think what you just said is. It's the only 2 words I put on there. And believe me, I had 2 weeks of words I could have chose from. Those were my words.
That's a great observation. And see, what separates to me the great professional, the great salesperson, the great pitch person, or what have you, are people who really listen, verbal and nonverbal cues. Too often we're listening not to understand, but we're listening to come up with a solution and to show how good or bright we or great we are, what have you. What separates the true greats in terms of professionals and salespeople and entrepreneurs are not the people who come off as the smartest people in the room, but the people who listen and come up with solutions based upon what they've heard, not what they assume. There's a great saying, that people who make a lot of assumptions are asses. And that's definitely true. You can't base an important assessment of a situation based on assumptions. You can only do that by asking really great probing questions, listening to the answers, and following up with even more great probing questions.
Yeah, wow. Another really good point you just brought out there. Just right at the end there, because I think it's key. It's asking those questions with you. It's listening to the answers with you. And then showing that you've been listening by going a little bit deeper. Because imagine if I was asking you something that was emotional to you or very difficult, and it was a great question I asked. You said, and that's the way I feel. I went, interesting. Now, what kind of car do you drive? I mean, why wouldn't I go deeper into that if I was truly taking in what you had to say and not thinking about my next question, just focusing on what I'm hearing? And I just think that's what makes for a great conversation. It's fabulous. My father-in-law was a ambassador. And the first time I ever met him, my wife said, I'm sure you'll like him. I went, well, we'll see about that. But anyway, I really liked the guy. It was like the greatest conversation I ever had. And when I went out, I went, what a guy. And she said, yeah, you know why you liked him? Because he doesn't talk. And I said, and the next time I met with him, Larry, I was sort of waiting for it. And he still kind of muscled. It still took me a few times to go, my goodness, this guy doesn't talk, but he feeds great questions. He follows up on those questions. He locks eyes with you and experiences your responses. And at the end of the day, it feels like each of us has been talking about the same amount when he speaks very little. And just, what an amazing amount of trust he could create. Tremendous communicator. But I really love what you have to say. And I love the fact that your book and you simplify and process this, because too often, even at Xerox, I'm embarrassed to tell you, but back in the late 80s, I was working on a model for them, and it was a 16-step model, sales model. And the first step was build trust. And then the second step was all these urgency moves. That was it. That was the step. Build it. Well, yeah, I play golf. I want to hit it 300 yards. Me too. How? And you're giving us tools to do that. So, and they're logical, Larry, but they're not instinctive. I keep pushing back. It takes work to do what you're saying.
It takes a lot of work. And not just a lot of work. And I talk about this towards the very end of the book. And this is true not just in this context, but in a whole bunch of other life contexts. You've got to do a lot of unlearning. What you mentioned, 30 seconds ago about a traditional sales model, in terms of whether it's schmoozing or playing golf or what have you. I mean, quite frankly, in this day and age, if you're trying to build trust, a traditional way to try to do an opening in a sales is to see if there's a common interest. Tell me about your family, where'd you go to school, who's your favorite sports team, so on and so forth. And one of the things over the last 10 years, whether it's social media or COVID or whatever, people are far less enamored with, that type of small talk. That not that they want to get down to business in the rote manner that I was talking about a little while ago, but they want you to find out about them in terms of deeper things, not where you went to school or how many kids you have, but basically, tell me about, tell me what's on your mind, or tell me, why, how I can help you and how we can work together. See, the whole concept of the book, frankly, and I alluded to this before, is it's a partnership. You're trying to build a partnership with the other person. And the way you don't build a partnership is start doing I. The way you start building a partnership is focusing on you. And then once you find out about them, then you can start determining what I can bring to the table to help them.
Yeah. Insta-Trust, the proven trust building process to create instant rapport and long-term relationships. I'm assuming we won't have any trouble finding that on Amazon. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Good. I'm going to swap a piece back with you, and it might be a little salesy, but I'll tell you, once I undid the mess I did at Xerox, because I was on the development team and just poo-poo. I didn't mean to poo-poo it. I just threw that everyone knows how to create trust blanket over the trust stage, and repaired that. But one thing I learned at Xerox was when we're building trust, keep it open early. Their personality will determine how long we spend there, but we're going to start keeping it open. Maybe begin with the end in mind. In other words, let's get into some questions that, if I'm talking about a telephone, then I want to know how many we have and where they are and why you chose this one. But so I'm not just asking about the NBA playoffs.
Sure.
But one of the other elements, Larry, from a sales side of this is it's really hard for salespeople to grasp. They get it, they just have trouble following it. Is not to lead with problems. So I'm meeting Larry for the first time, and I want to get to know you and learn about what you do in your business and how you do it. And Larry says, "Okay," and I go, "Good. Do you have a problem with the way your phones are currently working? Because I happen to have pulled up in a phone truck." Okay.
Right.
It's a little obvious. So to stay off the problem, because that keeps people from lying, because a lot of people hear that early and they go, "Well, if I tell this lawyer Larry, answer that question to Larry that way, I'll never get him out of my office. So I'm going to lie." I'd rather hear how much and how often and where and when, and build that rapport and that trust that you're talking about. So for us, we are methodical about actually keeping the problem related questions, kind of earning the right to get there. But we don't have to earn the right to. We were invited in this office or in this conversation to at least talk about you and how you will go about doing things. Does that fit with your model? Okay.
Yes, it does, because at the end of the day, we're in the solutions business.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I, I have a concept that's very similar to what you were saying in terms of, thinking of the end in mind, called backward thinking, which is not in the book. But backward thinking is basically, having an end game in mind and then trying to figure out the puzzle as to the different ways you can get there, working backwards, from a beginning. In not all circumstances are we able to provide a concrete solution at the end of a first interaction. If you're a doctor, you may need to run some tests. If you're an attorney, you may need to get, a boatload worth of facts. If you're a dentist, you're going to need x-rays and so on and so forth. So, but what you can do at a minimum is to throw out, after you've had a good professional conversation, the fact that there may be 2, 3, 4, solutions. You don't want to overburden them and give them the impression that there may be 10, because, then, that might put them on the defensive. But the notion is that you do want to try to have as an end game for an initial meeting with the fact that, I've heard you. I think we can go to war together, or what have you. And here, off the top of my head, based on what you've told me, here are possible solutions. And then, we might have to, come up with, another time to discuss them. Now, that's a little bit more abstract than if you're selling telephones or cars or computers. Although I will tell you that, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, the bigger ticket the item is, the more you're going to have multiple meetings to sell it, simply because of the dollar value and the importance. But the whole notion in terms of that first meeting and Insta-Trust really focuses on the first, maybe the second meeting, is at the end of that initial process, that the other person feels that you're competent, that you understand them, and that they want to work with you.
Yeah.
And you got to have all three. And if you have all three, you're much more likely to be retained, get the deal, so on and so forth. But you've probably seen the research, and even intuitively, the notion in these initial meetings is you want to let them speak at least 2/3 to 3/4 of the entire time, and you're maybe speaking 1/3 to 1/4 of the time, which begs the question with respect to two things. First of all, you do have to control the conversation so that 2/3 to 3/4 of their time, what they're talking about is relevant and allows you to, get in there, not only to build trust, but to potentially assess the situation for solutions. But then you have to be incredibly clinical and surgical, to use two medical terms, as to how you're going to use your 1/3 to 1/4 time. You've got to really be, you've really got to be listening and ask really pertinent questions. Pertinent questions meaning, how can I solve it, as opposed to questions that show how smart I am.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. And that's another reason why I'm if I have a social client, we'll talk about the Lakers and the Kings, but or like Lakers and the Warriors, but yeah, a lot of times that's just eating up time, and it's not, I'm with you. We have an old saying in sales, and it's probably been out there for everyone, but the more the client talks, the more they like you, the more they trust you.
Right.
And again, we see that on paper. It's just most people don't actually adhere to that. P.S. That piece that you were just talking about, that's what second editions are for. So hold on to that.
Right.
Because that one goes into the second edition right out of the gate, because that's a big piece. All right. I want to do kind of a 180, because I didn't want to get off our call and conversation without you touching us, because I found it interesting as I was looking over my notes on you, that you have an opinion about social media and its impact on your online reputation. And I'm wondering how that fits into the equation, but I'm always curious about that. So we interrupt this conversation about trust to hear about that. How do you respond to that?
I have very mixed feelings about social media. And I mean, I use it, but I don't use it probably as much as other people who do what I do. In this day and age, if you're not careful, with what you say, social media can eviscerate your reputation very, very quickly. I think that for most professionals, the importance of social media, frankly, is more in the form of recommendations and referrals and so on and so forth. That, in a perfect world, you want to come off as somebody who is people really, are interested in referring business, to you. But I think that, and I mean, this is a whole different conversation. I mean, if you can certainly use social media to your benefit, but I differentiate between what I'll call broad-based businesses or broad-based practices and all, in niche. If you're a niche, you can get away with a lot more. Let's assume you're a video, you do video games, and that's all you do, and you only, have a handful. You can be far more provocative, because your customer base and all is going to understand that being a rebel or outside of the box or what have you is who you are. And so you can get away with a lot more in terms of things that, if you're Disney, and this has nothing to do with what's going on politically in Florida, but Disney has a huge tent. And so Disney has to be bland to a certain extent, because they can't afford to, offend, the people in the vast middle. Their vast middle could be like 75, 80% of the entire country. So they have to have entertainment that pleases that's for the great masses. However, if I'm doing a video game, I might only have to get the attention of 1 to 2% of the country, and I can be much more provocative in terms of that, in terms of my social media and everything like that. The same is true with professionals. If you're a solo, let's say a solo orthopedic surgeon, and you're great at what you do, you can be far more provocative in terms of your social media, because people are going to view you as this creative genius or what have you, and they're going to give you a lot more leeway than if you're Northwestern Memorial Hospital here in Chicago and you've got patients from all over the Midwest and you can't afford to offend anybody. So the reality in terms of social media is, I think you have to have a strategy for using social media. It has to correspond and correlate with your brand. And you have to understand that if you deviate from what's important to your brand, that your social media can destroy your reputation very, very quickly.
Yeah. So in short, you can't be everything to everybody. You better know where you read the room and know your people. I'm with you on that one. As a professional speaker, I like everyone else, I do my best on social media, but I know my crowd, and I know how I can communicate with them, and I have to be very careful because they expect certain things a certain way, and they'll let me know.
I'm writing that down, by the way. Know your crowd. That's a great. Thank you very much for that.
You bet. You know what else I got from you as we're wrapping up? I was listening to you, and I wrote this down. I thought, where did I put it? There it is. I wrote, trust is the oil to the engine. We built an engine at Xerox. We built a beautiful engine. We forgot to put oil in it, meaning we undervalued trust. It's not that we didn't use the word, but what I like about my conversation with you, Larry, is you're not just looking at me going, so you need to do it. You're breaking it out in repeatable, predictable moves. And that makes it measurable to me, and that makes it really interesting to me. That's a mistake we made at Xerox. I'm not telling you they didn't clean that up, but that's one I was a part of. And it's one of the reasons why I was excited to have you on the show, because we can't say this enough. It's one of these things that people think they're doing until you actually show them, like I said, a chess clock, count their questions. I've seen people who will have a conversation when we're done and we're counting. They'll have 40 statements to 2 questions. But to them, it's an unconscious incompetency. They don't know that they don't know. We kind of feel like we're doing it, but we're not. And that's why I think it's great that we've got that book out there. I hope everyone gets a copy of it. Remember, the rules of Pocket Sized Pep Talks are you're only half done when you get the book. You're done when you write the review on the book, because authors, it's important to Amazon. It's important to authors. So we're going to grab that book and we're going to write a review on it. Larry, I've enjoyed the conversation. How do people get a hold of you?
They can get a hold of me. There's a website for the book, insta-trust.com. They can also get a hold of me at protrustconsulting.com.
Got it. And I saw TM. I see that you're trademarking it. Do we have a circle R on that yet, or are we still TM?
We're TM.
Okay. All right.
Oh, no, I take it back. We now, within the last few weeks, actually, I think it was like beginning of April, we finally got the registered trademark. For ProTrust, this was a COVID issue. It took like over 2 years. For Insta-Trust, it only took 18 months.
Well, I've been there and done that. I got a couple circle R's out there. That's why I was smiling, going, I know it takes a while, but it's always good when we finally get that R up there. So congratulations on that. Larry, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you and listening to you. I hope I'm not insulting you when I tell you you're a salesman's best friend. The sales community can really learn and listen and get value out of that book of yours. And I hope they all grab a copy of it. And I'm grateful you spent some time with us today.
And it was really nice spending the time with you. I learned a lot from you as well today. So thank you very much for having me.
And that's the beauty of a podcast, folks. Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.